Live from the BBC, The Naked Scientists.
Well, a very good evening to you. Welcome to this week's edition of The Naked Scientists with me, Dr. Chris, and with Dr. Kat.
Hello.
We're here this evening, and under the microscope, the science of insects. Not so much the birds and the bees as the fleas and the bees. Here to help us talk about the science of insects, we have from Insect Research and Development outside Cambridge, Ian Burgess. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Chris.
We have food columnist for the Sunday Telegraph, writer and historian Bee Wilson. No pun intended, that's her real name. Good evening, Bee.
Yes, it is. Hi, thank you.
She's going to be talking about her book, The Hive, which is all about bees, not surprisingly. So be warned, she's coming up shortly. And also coming up is William Foster from the Zoology Department at Cambridge University. Good evening, William.
Hello,
Thank you for popping in. And his expertise is all about how social insects like ants and bees work together and form colonies. So if you want to know anything about that, get phoning in now, 08459 25 2000, or you can send me an email, chris@nakedscientist.com, for anything to do with insects. Ian's expertise is in insects like mosquitoes that spread diseases, bed bugs, fleas, lice. What sorts of diseases because they spread? How do you know if you've got bed bugs and house dust mites and horrible things in your bed? Get calling now, 08459 25 2000. And shortly we'll also be speaking live from California to Megan Frederickson, who has got an interesting story to tell about how insects are doing some pretty strange things in the Amazon rainforest. Also coming up, some top science news stories, and here's Kat with a rundown.
Yep, this evening we're going to be talking about how insects may be able to help cure a bad back in the future, and apparently the secret is nature's elastic bands, and that doesn't mean like pinging bees and things across the room, though I'd like to see that. I'm also going to be talking about sniffer wasps. You've heard of sniffer dogs, now we'll be having sniffer wasps, so stay tuned to find out about those. And also stay tuned for our quiz, to play our quiz Science Fact, Science Fiction. In the prize bucket tonight, we have the entire Encyclopaedia Britannica on DVD. That's brilliant. It doesn't mean it takes up your bookshelves, it's a DVD. It's worth £100. We've also got a Build Your Own Ant Farm, donated by the wonderful Anne at sciencesleuth.co.uk. So you can get your own ant farm, get your own insect action going on. And we also have a copy here of Bee's book on bees. So get phoning in now, 08459 25 2000, to play Science Fact, Science Fiction, and Chris will tell us how it works.
It's really simple. We give you 3 easy science facts, and you have to tell us whether you think they're true or false. And tonight's top score goes into the hat, and you could walk away with one of our 3 prizes. So call now, 08459 25 2000 to take part. We're also taking any science questions on anything. We'll have a stab at them. Call us now, 08459 25 2000.
The Naked Scientist Podcast, brought to you by thenakedscientist.com.
We've got an email here from Maz Bawani, and she's in Peterborough, and she says that she's recently started listening to the show. She thinks it's brill. Woo! And she thought she'd write in to settle an argument between her and her gran, who claims that talking to plants makes them grow better, and she wants to know, is this true? And so we've had a little look around, dig around in the Naked Scientist files.
Prince Charles talks to his plants, doesn't he?
Apparently so, yes. I can't imagine the plants really love that much. So in 1948, apparently Dr. Gustav Fechner thought that plants indeed had emotions, and so talking to them would help you, get in touch with your plants and help them to grow. And also a study showed that music might help plants. And classical music...
How can music help plants?
Well, we'll come on to this in a minute. And that classical music might be good for your plants, and that aggressive, sort of rock or punk music helps your plants to wither away. But apparently...
It helps them to wither.
But they die happy. They die rocking, I reckon. But apparently this is not the case, although they think that if you talk to your plants, you'll be giving them more attention and probably helping to look after them better. And there is some scientific truth in it. If you got right up close to your plants and talked to them for several hours a day, they'd probably get more carbon dioxide. Because we breathe out carbon dioxide from our metabolism, and plants need carbon dioxide for their metabolism. But it would mean probably, really getting up close and being very friendly with your plants all day.
Does it make a difference if you've got bad breath?
That's not carbon dioxide, Chris. And I have to tell you about that later.
Laying the facts bare, The Naked Scientists.
Now, I've got an email from Simon, who's in Tiptree. He sent it this afternoon. Says, "Hi, Chris. Firstly, a comment on the show. I listen on BBC Essex on Sunday evenings. Brilliant, interesting, informative, well presented. One of the few programmes to which it's genuinely worth listening. Keep up the good work." Checks in the post, Simon. He says, "A bit of a problem. I'm frequently unable to listen between 6 and 7, so I often miss the programme. A real pity. Is there a practical solution?" Well, yes, there is, because, of course, you can also grab this programme, Simon, from our website. NakedScientist.com has a podcast, and what that means is that the programme is available digitally on your computer. If you go to nakedscientist.com/podcast, it tells you how you can get the audio from the programme and listen again in your own time, either on your computer or on your MP3 player if you need to. Now, Simon goes on to ask us a couple of interesting questions. He says, firstly, a question about energy conservation. "Many years ago, I was told that 6-foot fluorescent strip lights are more efficient and need less energy than tungsten lighting to run." By tungsten lighting, he means those normal bulbs that you screw into the ceiling and they have a sort of thin wire inside that glows white hot when you turn them on. He says, "Is this true? If so, how long do they have to be left on before they use less energy overall? So if you flicked on a light for a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes in a room, would it be better to use the tungsten one or the fluorescent light?" That's true. The way fluorescent lights work is that they contain a gas at a certain low pressure, and you fire that gas up by putting a high voltage, a high frequency electrical signal through there, and the electricity passing a current through the gas excites the atoms. In fact, we use mercury in strip lights, a form of mercury, and what happens is the atoms become very, very excited, and they lose some of their electrons. The electrons get flicked or bombarded up to what's called a higher energy level, and then they fall back to a normal energy level, and when they do so, they emit some light, and they in fact emit a bit of ultraviolet light, and that ultraviolet light then strikes what's called a phosphor, which is a coating on the inside of the glass tube, and that phosphor turns the ultraviolet light rays into a second form of energy, which is visible white light, and it's very efficient, that process. So strip lighting is more efficient. Tungsten bulbs just work by heating up a piece of metal in the tiny filament till it becomes white hot, and in fact only about 20% of the energy they use actually turns into anything which is terrifically useful.
And you'll be interested to know that here in the studio we've got 2 sets of strip lights, and we've got those lovely energy efficient light bulbs as well. Naked Scientists, energy efficient.
So we're endorsing using strip lights here, because they are more efficient in the long run. In the very short term, yeah, you'd have to leave them on for a little while to actually get the full benefit of it. But I think probably in the long run, in terms of their lifetime, etc., then strip lights are probably better.
Is it appropriate that the Naked Scientists use strip lighting?
It's highly appropriate. Here's another question from Simon's Way. He says, "Fuel for road vehicles. On a garage forecourt recently, both the petrol and diesel pumps carried a notice to the effect that the automatic cutout was not working properly due to the fact we've taken delivery of our winter fuel, but the weather has been unseasonably mild. What's the difference between fuel sold in the winter and that sold in the summer?" The answer to that is that the garage and the refinery make changes to the mix which is sold on the forecourts between winter and summer, because the driving conditions are obviously much different. The starting conditions are particularly different, so engines have to get going from a much colder temperature, which means that what you tend to do in winter is put additives in the fuel which make it vaporise at a lower temperature, which facilitates cold starting. Because if you remember those days a few years ago when you used to get in the car on a cold morning and it was a bit touch and go whether it was going to start or not, especially with diesel engines, those days are gone, and engines tend to be much more reliable, and a hell of a lot of that is down to the much better fuel mix. And there is definitely a mix change between summer and winter, and it's more volatiles, which make the fuel much easier to ignite in wintertime than in summertime. So I hope that answers your question, Simon.
Doesn't make it any cheaper though. Now, sniffer wasps. What's this all about? So some scientists, I think this is absolutely great, some scientists in America have been training sniffer wasps to sniff out explosives, dead bodies, rotten food, all these kind of things. And it's absolutely great. They've trained wasps. These are small sort of parasitic wasp called Microplytis chrysapes, excellent Latin there. These are non-stinging parasitic wasps, and they live in a little cup called a wasp hound. And a wasp hound, or wasp pound. It says wasp hound here. Maybe it's a pun. I don't know. Anyway, they train their wasps to respond to certain smells using a food reward. So, they see the smell, do something, and they get a food reward. So you can train your wasps, and apparently you can train one wasp in about 5 minutes. So that's possibly a career option for any of you students out there, wasp trainer. And what you do is you put 5 wasps in your wasp hound detector and attach a camera to it. And when you put your wasp hound near a the thing that you want them to smell. So in this case, they trained this special fungus that lives on rotting corn. They trained them to respond to that. You put your detector near it, and the wasps will kind of move. And the camera can pick that up and sound an alarm and says, no, this is wrong, this is bad, smells funny.
There's a group of researchers in the States that are using bees to flush out landmines.
Really?
Yeah, Dr. Bromenshank and his team have worked out that you can train bees to recognise the smell which leaches out of a landmine in the ground. Landmines, 99% of the time, use the explosive TNT, trinitrotoluene, and when it breaks down, it produces the gas nitrogen dioxide, which leaches up from the soil. And obviously, if you're sensitive to that, which you can train bees to be, then they can pick it up, because they have incredibly sensitive, obviously, ability to smell. And the way in which they do this training is that you put food for the bees in one place, and you spike it with a tiny trace of this TNT explosive, and so the bees learn to associate the smell of the explosive with being fed, and then when you release these bees on an area where there might be mines lurking, they go looking, following this scent, because they think, well, if I go to where the scent is, I'll be fed. And so what you do is they have this very clever laser system which scans the whole field, and it can literally pinpoint individual bee positions on the surface of the field, and obviously where bees spend more time is probably where the landmines are. So over time you build up a profile of the field with hotspots picked up where lots of bees tend to congregate more often than others, and that's literally where the landmines are.
They use BPS for that. Anyway, they're training these wasps to not only sniff out mouldy corn, but also to detect explosives using a similar principle, and to detect things like dead bodies as well. The chemicals they give off are very smelly too. So maybe wasps in the future, maybe we'll see them in airports, who knows.
I'm here right now in Rendlesham Forest down in Suffolk, and I have to say it is pretty eerie. We've got a pine forest here, it's all quite close, and I'm hoping we're not going to get unexpected visitors here today. Now I'm just about to approach a clearing where the UFO is alleged to have landed 25 years ago.
I was out early in the morning, went out to chop logs, and a car pulled up, and two young men got out, young 25, 30, something like that. They said red lights had been seen in the forest, and they wanted to talk to anyone who had seen them.
We've seen craft, we've seen the greys, which are ETs, we've seen streakers, which are lights going across all over the place, and we've seen orbs of light. We see something nearly every night we come down here, and it's just magical.
Next week, from the Ministry of Defence, Nick Pope will be here in the studio taking your calls and sightings about UFOs, and we've been out to look at what's been going on in the past in Rendlesham Forest because it's 25 years since that amazing night, and we've got some of those eyewitness accounts.
Sorting out the sparks from the quarks. The Naked Scientists. For more information, get online at nakedscientists.com.
It's been possible this week to track down somebody over in the States who's done really the Jurassic Park equivalent of the virus world to rebuild the flu virus from 1918, which gave rise to the Spanish flu. Jeff Taubenberger has recreated that virus in an attempt to understand a little bit more about how it caused the flu pandemic, how it might be, the same thing might be happening today, and what really we can do about it.
Pandemic influenza is a very important problem in public health. Influenza pandemics appear suddenly and unexpectedly 2 or 3 times every 100 years, and there have been 3 in the last 100 years. And the biggest influenza pandemic in recorded history is the so-called Spanish flu back in 1918. This is important because at least 50 million people were killed by this virus during its circulation in 1918 and early 1919. What's important is that we have now been able to finish sequencing the complete coding sequence or genome of the 1918 virus from tiny fragments of genetic material that were left over in the lung tissues of people who died of the flu back in 1918.
Have there been any surprises coming to light as a result of your analysis?
I think the most important thing, now that we have the complete set of gene sequences of the 1918 virus in front of us, is that the 1918 virus, we think, is an entirely bird-like virus that adapted to humans. And what makes this surprising is that the last 2 pandemics that happened in 1957, so-called Asian flu, and in 1968, the Hong Kong flu, they were viruses where you'd had a human-adapted influenza virus that acquired some new genes from a bird virus. But the 1918 virus looks like it was an entirely new virus to humans in 1918, that we think all the gene segments came from a bird. And so this is quite surprising, and also adds a lot of concern about the current situation with the H5N1 so-called chicken flu virus in Asia right now.
You're saying this 1918 strain looks like it jumped straight out of birds and into humans, but how did it actually do that? How did it change in a way that enabled it to then immediately start spreading amongst humans in this devastating way?
So we're still not sure what happened, but the other thing that we have been doing in trying to understand how this process works is to identify the changes that we would think, based on our data analysis, are the crucial changes that allow a bird-like virus to adapt to humans. We have a very small list of only 10 amino acid changes, and the really surprising thing about this is that the only avian viruses that have any of those changes tend to be some of these recent highly pathogenic H5N1 viruses that have been infecting people and killing people.
Exactly the type we're seeing at the moment in East Asia.
That's correct. And so what we are wondering is if this reflects an example of what we would call parallel evolution. That is, the virus is going down the same path that it did in 1918, leading it to being adapted to humans.
So you think we could be approaching the same sort of genetic climax?
Yes, we might be looking at the early phases of that. And I think the importance of this work is that it gives us some of these clues. Now, we have to go back and look carefully and experimentally as to try to identify which of these changes are really important for the virus as it switches hosts.
Does this mean then that what we saw in 1957 and again in 1968, they weren't the kind of mega pandemics on the scale of the 1918 because they are a different phenomenon entirely, and that what's actually brewing now could actually be the harbinger of 1918 all over again?
That's certainly a possibility. The unusual origin of the 1918 virus may certainly be related to its unusual virulence and killing so many people, but we can't actually yet also prove that hypothesis. So, even though we have now got the complete sequence in front of us, we still cannot answer the very fundamental questions yet about why the 1918 virus killed so many people and exactly how the pandemic emerged. But it gives us the tools now to very carefully examine those two questions in experimental models. Hopefully, this will shed light on how pandemics form and the H5 before another pandemic does start.
Jeff Taubenberger from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in the US talking to us about what could be happening out there in Asia and also possibly in Eastern Europe today. If you want to ask us a question about the science of avian flu or any other things to do with science, technology and medicine, we're also talking insect science this evening on The Naked Scientist, 08459 25 2000, or email me, chris@nakedscientist.com.
The Naked Scientist Podcast, brought to you by thenakedscientist.com.
Malcolm is in Essex. Hello, Malcolm.
2 weeks ago you were talking about babies and things being born, and the chap was saying that when you're born out of 2 cells they multiply and they grow, and you have thousands of cells that are wasted and thousands of cells are making you up.
Yeah.
In that case then, if I cut off my finger, why doesn't it carry on making cells and give me a finger? Because it gave me a finger when I was a baby.
This is a really interesting question, and it explains basically why we're different between humans and things like amphibians. Because, if you cut the tail off a newt, newts can grow back their tails and their limbs. And human cells can't do this, mostly. We do have some cells within our bodies, for example in our brain and in certain parts of our skin, that can keep on growing, and that's why we can heal small wounds. But with something like a finger, the cells are so complicated, there's so many different types of cells, that our stem cells aren't capable of making these kinds of cells. They just don't have it left in them to do it. So that's the reason why we can't regenerate our limbs. We basically don't have the genes and the genetic program to do it.
But we did once, is the kind of argument, because we've obviously come from a common ancestor.
Exactly. After your body's grown as a baby, all the genes that are responsible for that growth and development are basically shut down and turned off and can't be used again. So maybe if we could find some way of turning them back on, then you could turn cells back into having this kind of stem cell or regenerative property. It's something that people are looking at, but it's certainly a very long way in the future.
Does that help you, Malcolm?
Yeah, lovely.
Do you want to have a quick go at the quiz? Because up for grabs tonight we have an Encyclopaedia Britannica, we also have an anthill making kit, and we also have a copy of Bee's book, The Hive.
Lovely. Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
You can see the Great Wall of China from space. Is that science fact or science fiction?
That's science fact.
No, mathematically this is actually impossible, despite the fact that it's very long. The Great Wall of China is only about 5 metres wide. So even if you had perfect eyesight, you'd struggle to pick it out from even up to about 60,000 feet up in the air. That's twice the height of Mount Everest. And this is still way below the altitude at which spacecraft orbit, so in fact it's a myth that it's visible from space. And also the Apollo astronaut Neil Armstrong said that he couldn't see it from space. So if you ever get that in a pub quiz, you'll know that it's a lie.
And he wasn't short-sighted, presumably?
I shouldn't think so if he was a pilot and an astronaut.
Next question, Malcolm. Boa constrictors can reach up to 30 feet in length. Do you think that's fact or fiction?
Fact.
Oh, no. Boa constrictors are South American snakes. They usually reach 12 feet in length and up to 40 pounds, living in hollow logs and mammal burrows, eating possums and bats, which they kill by wrapping their bodies around them and suffocating them before swallowing
Nice
them
animals.
whole.
You're probably thinking about pythons, weren't you, at the time?
Yeah.
Mosquitoes flap their wings about 600 times a second. Is that science fact or science fiction?
I'll go for fiction.
Wrong choice, Malcolm.
Oh, bad luck. No, that kind of noise, that's a mosquito doing it 600 times a second. Bad
Malcolm,
luck.
0 out of 3, Malcolm. At the moment, you're in the lead. I don't know how long for, but it's been great having you on the show. Thanks for calling in.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.
Stripping down science.
Okay, let's do it.
The Naked Scientists.
Let me tell you about this interesting discovery which has come from Australia. A guy called Chris Elvin reckons that they might be on the verge of curing a bad back, because what they've done is to copy a gene from a fly which is called resilin. And resilin, as the name suggests, is very resilient. In fact, it's the gene which makes bumblebees' wings flap 500 million times during their lifetime. That's not a tiny undertaking. What this protein is, bumblebees and all other insects with wings and fleas use it to jump, and froghoppers have actually leapt into the Guinness Book of Records in 2005 using this protein. The way in which this stuff actually works, it's like a giant elastic band. This protein is very coiled up in structure, and it can store energy. So when you stretch it, it then pings back into shape very, very quickly, and it doesn't deform, it doesn't bend or go out of shape when it does it, which is how these bees can keep their wings flapping so fast for so long. So that's really cool. But one of the things about this is that because it's a natural protein, they've been able to copy it from these flies and put it into bacteria and persuade bacteria to make copies of this protein for them. And then they've managed to make it form in the actual dish into the mature protein. And they've been able to make tiny strands of this stuff, which actually is much better than any other man-made fibre we can currently make that could do this job. And so what they think is that if we can make enough of this stuff, we might have the perfect replacement for vertebral discs. These are the things that sit between each of the bones in your backbone and mop up the shocks when you run along or walk or bend and stretch. And since Chris Elvin says, since you move your back about 100 million times in a lifetime, since this stuff can survive being stretched and relaxing about 500 million times, then it should be more than adequate for the job. Kat?
That sounds incredibly useful to me, and anyone else there with a bad back. I've got a story here about some Canadian scientists who have been looking at snow fleas. These are tiny little bugs that live in the snow, and they found that they have antifreeze in them. So normally, we freeze when we get cold, and that's why humans can't get too cold. But these fleas live on snow, and they don't freeze. The researchers found that they have this protein in them, which they call antifreeze protein. And it's very rich in something called glycine. Glycine's an amino acid, which is one of the building blocks of all the proteins in our body. But it's very rich in it, and it gives it a very low melting point, so it doesn't freeze when it gets really cold. And they actually purified this protein by trying to stick the proteins in the flea to ice. And what they did is they got some ice and they ran all the proteins past it and found the ones that stuck to the ice were these antifreeze proteins. So they call that affinity purifying it because it's got an affinity for ice. And then they thought about what they could do with this antifreeze protein. Now they've got it. And apparently it could be very useful for transplanted organs. So if you have an organ that's going to be transplanted, you have to keep it very cold. Otherwise, if it gets warm, then the cells start to break down and the organ's no good anymore. So you have to keep them at freezing point. But if you could use this sort of protein within the organ, then you could actually keep it at a colder temperature without damaging the tissue of the organ. So maybe this would mean that transplants could survive longer. They also think it might be useful for increasing the resistance to frost in plants, and for also preserving frozen foods a bit better by helping to preserve the structure of the cells in the frozen foods.
I was just thinking also organ transplants and all that kind of thing. If you at the moment, we have to find ways to preserve tissue that we want to store for a long time and minimise the chance of it having ice crystals forming, and then obviously it gets damaged. If we can find a better way to get things very, very cold so the cells don't get damaged, but at the same time not actually have to freeze them, that would be really, really helpful.
Exactly. The damage happens when ice crystals form in the cell and just burst through it.
You're listening to The Naked Scientist, Dr. Chris and Dr. Kat here with you right across the east of England on BBC Local Radio. If you'd like to ask us a question, 08459 25 2000, or you can send me an email, chris@nakedscientist.com. We're talking the science of insects this evening, and very shortly we'll be catching up with Ian Burgess from Insect Research and Development in Cambridge about his work on bed bugs and fleas and lice and how they spread coughs and diseases. We'll also be talking to William Foster from the University of Cambridge, who works on social insects like bees and also like ants and how they form colonies and how they go out and forage and communicate and follow paths and find their way to food and that kind of thing. And also to Bill B. Wilson, who's a food writer and historian and has also come up with a book called The Hive. And she'll be talking about her book tomorrow night in Cambridge, actually, at Borders Bookstore. So if you want to go along and meet Bee, it starts at 8 o'clock and it's completely free. It's probably appropriate for anyone of pretty much any age, but probably 12 and upwards would probably enjoy it the most, and we'll probably lay on a cup of coffee for you as well. So come and join us at 8 o'clock tomorrow to hear Bee talk there. If you've got a science question for us, 08459 25 2000, or send me an email, chris@nakedscientist.com.
Fancy listening to The Naked Scientists in your bed, on your way to work, or even at work? Why not subscribe to our podcast? For more information, visit nakedscientist.com/podcast.
The Naked Scientist, Dr. Chris and Dr. Kat with you until 7 o'clock on the BBC, right across the east of England. If you want to ask us a question about anything to do with science, technology and medicine, 08459 25 2000, or email chris@nakedscientist.com. I have an interesting question here, which is from Greg McQueen, who's in Denmark. He says, just to let you know, I listened to the podcast version of your show in Denmark. Great show. I always look forward to listening to it on iTunes. In the last show, I heard you talk about snot and its purpose of filtering out dirt and germs from the air, and there was a brief mention of saliva. Although saliva is used to start the process of breaking down food and makes it easier to swallow food, I'm wondering if saliva has any healing properties. Cats lick their wounds, and often people instinctively lick or suck small cuts on the backs of their hands. So does saliva help to keep things germ-free and make them heal up quicker? Keep up the good work. It really looks like you're helping to make science accessible to everyone. Well, thanks for that, Greg. The answer to your question is yes, saliva does have some beneficial properties because it contains a number of proteins, and those proteins include antibodies, and we make a lot of antibodies when we are infected with things that can mop up various bugs and viruses, so that's one bonus of saliva. It also contains another protein called lysozyme, and this is an enzyme that can break down certain kinds of bacterial cell walls, and so when you lick something that's got certain bacteria on it, those lysozymes attack the bacteria and help to neutralise them, so that's one other thing. And that's also in tears as well. You also make antibodies and lysozyme in your tear film. And one of the other things in saliva is mucus, and mucus is a protein which forms a sort of meshwork, and it traps things and stops them obviously moving away too fast, and it also has a lubricating role so you can swallow things more easily. But yes, saliva does have a sort of medicinal role too. Kat?
I'm absolutely intrigued by that. So what we want to do is get you phoning in with questions that you might have, like that, about saliva, snot, but tonight mainly about insects. So we've got talk about bees, we've got talk about bed bugs, lice, anything like that. And I'm sure you've got loads of questions. I've got loads of questions, certainly. I want to know, why do horseflies hurt so much when they sting you? That's what I want to know.
Ian Burgess is from Research and Development in Cambridge.
Well, Kat, the reason they hurt so much is that normally they bite very large animals, things like deer, cattle and things that can't turn around and smack them one. So it doesn't really matter. They don't have to creep up on you. So they have really quite large mandibles and chew a big hole in you. And then they lap the blood as it starts to flow out. And of course, with a thick-skinned animal like a cow, they do have to chew quite a big hole. And they don't adjust for when they're biting on human skin, which is really quite thin. So it hits the nerves rather quicker.
Oh, and is it true that can spiders bite humans, like the spiders we get in the UK? Because I'm sure I've been bitten at night by spiders.
Well, I don't know whether you have been bitten at night. There are some.
Maybe I'm making it up. Yeah.
There are several spiders that can bite in this country. There are a couple that live mostly in the south of England that are moderately venomous, and even the big house spiders can bite, particularly if you annoyed them. And in fact, one of the house spiders we have in this country has been accidentally imported into the western seaboard of the USA, where it's spread further and further north year by year, and it's known as the hobo spider because it catches lifts on trains. And now it's reached Alaska, where it's not very nice for it to live out of doors. It lives in houses all the time, and it is quite a venomous spider. There are lots and lots of websites looking at hobo spiders and the way they attack people and things like that.
Do you know roughly how many of these sort of spiders get shipped in every year in bunches of bananas?
Oh, ones into this country, it's probably thousands, but most of them don't survive.
Because it's too cold, or nothing to eat? Or?
They come on chilled ships or chilled aeroplanes, and therefore it's too cold for them. But some of them do creep through, and the ones that we get are mostly widow spiders.
Black widow spiders?
Yeah.
But they're lethal, aren't they?
Well, only if you're sort of under 5 or you've got a weak heart or you're relatively elderly. Mostly they'll just make you feel really awful for about 24 to 48 hours.
What actually is it in the venom of a spider that makes those symptoms?
Well, widow spiders have what's known as a neurotoxic venom, which is one that attacks the central nervous system, so it gives you shakes and tremors and vomiting and things like that. Some of the other spiders have what's known as a cytolytic venom, things like the brown recluse spider, which again sometimes is imported. And that one causes tissue to break down, so you get a really nasty sort of gangrenous reaction.
Ooh, my God.
Sounds horrible.
How aggressive are insects generally? I mean, we all know that you shouldn't, annoy a wasp because it will come and sting you. Are there any really aggressive insects in the world?
Well, I would say probably bees are worse. Much more aggressive than anything else.
Surely wasps
what do you think about that?
No, wasps are really quite docile. Maybe apart from the Asiatic hornet.
Well, I'm sure William would know more than I would about the Africanized killer bees. I mean, I think of the domestic bees, they vary hugely. I mean, you can get all kinds of different bees who are specially bred for different temperaments, and I don't know, beekeepers become very fond of their bees, and I don't think they'd like to hear them being accused of being aggressive.
Is it true, Ian, that when you blow smoke into a beehive, it does actually calm them down? Is that actually genuinely how it works?
Oh, yeah, they're naturally... Their response to a forest fire is to engorge on their honey so that they can then move out and save some of their food reserves. So if you blow the smoke in, they think it's a forest fire and they fill themselves up and they get a bit dopey and drunk, so to speak. So that's why they're much less likely to be aggressive.
So it's like us having had a massive Sunday lunch, you just want to slouch in the armchair.
Pretty much so, yes.
Harriet is on the line. Hello, Harriet.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Where are you calling from?
Cornwall.
You're calling from Cornwall?
Yeah.
How are you listening to the programme in Cornwall?
We're not.
Oh, you're not? Are you normally a listener?
Yeah.
Are you on holiday?
Yeah.
Because it's half term? Right. Where are you at school normally then?
All Saints.
All Saints, where's that?
In March, Cambridgeshire.
Oh, right, so you normally listen on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. OK. What's your question?
Why does the flu jab only last 1 year?
Oh, well, that's a fantastic question. It's quite useful because we were talking about flu earlier, weren't we? Yes, the flu is a nasty virus. And the genetic material of the flu tends to make mistakes when it copies itself. So when the flu infects a person, the flu virus that person then makes and passes on to a second person looks a little bit different than the one that you were infected with because some mistakes are made when it copies itself. And as this happens, because the flu goes round the world, it takes a year to go right the way around the Earth and come back to where it started. By the time it comes home again, it looks very different than the version that was here the year before. And because your immune system is trained to home in on and recognise things very, very efficiently and very, very quickly, it can't recognise it the second time because it looks totally different. It's the same virus, but it looks a bit different. It's like you going and having a facelift and looking very different because you've dyed your hair and your face looks a different shape, but underneath you're still you. And that's what happens with the flu virus. And so the body can't recognise it so quickly. And so as a result, you're not immune to it. And the vaccine is made from the flu that was going around last year. So the vaccine's only good until the flu changes. So you have to keep it up to date and have a new one each year. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool.
Now, do you want to have a quick go at winning yourself an ant farm, Harriet?
Woohoo!
Yeah.
All right. Here we go then. Glass comes from volcanoes. Is that science fact or science fiction?
Is it science fact?
You're absolutely
Hooray.
right. You're in the lead so far. Yes, you can find examples of natural glass in volcanoes. It's called obsidian. It's that lovely sort of natural shiny glass stone.
Okay, next question, Harriet. You're doing very well. You're in the lead. Duck-billed platypuses are the only mammals in the world that lay eggs. Is that fact or fiction?
Fiction?
What do you think? What do you think other ones do then?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Storming ahead. Yes. There's another antipodean mammal called the echidna, or spiny anteater, and that also lays eggs. And these are also in the same sort of group, the same kind of family of mammals as platypuses. These are monotremes.
You're doing really well. You got 2 out of 3 so far, Harriet. Ready?
Yep.
Rhinoceroses' horns are made of highly compacted hair. Do you think that's science fact or science fiction?
Science fact.
Oh, I wanted that ant farm. Damn it. Yes, rhino horns are in fact made of the same stuff as hooves and hair. So they're hair-like strands of protein that are compacted really hard together and form a very tough bone-like material.
Brilliant, Harriet. 3 out of 3.
Excellent.
All right?
Yes.
Well done, and great question too. It's great having you on the programme. Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Bye. Harriet there, with 3 out of 3 in our competition. Up for grabs tonight, we have an Encyclopaedia Britannica, and we also have an ant farm, which you can get from sciencesleuth.co.uk. If you want to have a go at winning it, 08459 25 2000. Any science questions, but we are talking this evening about the science of insects and that kind of thing. You can email me as well, chris@nakedscientist.com. Let's have a quick chat to Sarah, who's in Cambridge. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Are you on half term?
Yeah.
Where are you at school?
All Saints.
Oh, same place as, where is it, Harriet?
Yeah.
Ah, right. So you must have been talking about science at school this week then.
Yeah.
What's your favourite bit of science?
I don't know really. I like it all.
Do you?
Brilliant.
Do you think you want to be a scientist when you leave school?
Am I?
Yeah, go for it. It's brilliant.
What's your question?
Why do insects have more legs than humans?
That sounds like a sort of Ian cum William question. William, what do you think the answer is?
I think if you're a small animal, it's quite hard to not fall over. And if you have only 2 legs, maybe you're going to fall over. So you need a sort of large number of legs to make sure you can stay on the ground all the time.
That sounds like a reasonable answer, doesn't it, Sarah?
Yeah.
Do you want to have a go at the quiz?
Yes, please.
The spleen is an organ in your abdomen that helps with digestion. Is that science fact or science fiction?
Fact.
No, bad luck. The spleen is a fist-sized organ on the left side of your tummy. It doesn't help you to digest food. It's actually involved in your immune system to protect you against illness and fight off infections. You can vent it if you're angry as well. Vent your spleen.
Now, you've got to get the next one right, okay?
Okay.
A blink lasts approximately 0.3 seconds. Fact or fiction?
Fact.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And if you drive at 60 miles an hour and blink, you'll be driving 10 metres blind. Scary.
You're doing very well now, okay? 1 out of 2. Next question. Fish hear through their bodies. Do you think that's science fact or science fiction?
Fact. No idea.
Say the first one again.
Say
Say the first answer again.
Fact.
Yay! Yes, most fish have 2 inner ears with no direct connection to their external environment. The fish ear contains bony structures called otoliths, covered in tiny hairs, and the motion of the fish in the water and the motion in the otoliths stimulates their hairs, and they interpret that as sound. I think we have otoliths, don't we, that are involved in our balance?
Absolutely
As far
right.
as
We
I know,
have
inside
them
our
too.
ears.
Well done. You got 2 out of 3. Very good. What are you after? Are you after an Encyclopaedia Britannica on DVD, or are you after an ant farm?
Encyclopedia.
Okay, we'll put you down on the list, and hopefully, if no one else wants that one, you can have that one, okay?
Okay.
All right then, thanks for your call.
Thanks. Bye.
You're listening to The Naked Scientist, Dr. Chris and Dr. Cat, here with you until 7. In the meantime, if you'd like to get a question to The Naked Scientist, Dr. Chris, Dr. Cat, until 7, we're talking the science of insects on BBC Local Radio in the Eastern Counties, 08459 25 2000. Right now, we're going to link up with Megan Fredrickson, who is in the US, in California, from Stanford University, who's been doing some interesting work in the Amazon. Hello, Megan.
Hi, Chris.
Good evening.
And good evening to you, too.
Now, tell us about your story.
Well, I've been studying a phenomenon called the Devil's Garden.
That sounds scary. What's a devil's garden?
a devil's garden is a very unusual kind of grove of trees that grows in the Amazon. And devil's gardens are very unusual because in these groves of trees there is only one or at most a few species of trees.
Yeah.
Which is very strange for the rainforest because usually in the rainforest there are hundreds of species of trees growing in a very small area.
So how big are these gardens actually? If you look at the largest of them, how big do they get?
They get to be about 1,300 square meters, which is about half the size of a soccer field, or I guess you guys would say a football field.
Wow. So that's pretty big to have just one area of just one type of tree. What sorts of things were going through your mind when you're thinking what was causing this?
Well, there were basically two ideas about how it is that devil's gardens are formed and how it is that there's only one kind of tree that grows in devil's gardens. And the first idea proposed that maybe the tree that grows in devil's gardens produces some kind of toxic chemical substance from its roots.
That kills everything else off.
Exactly, that seeps into the soil, kills everything else off, and prevents other trees from growing in the area.
How did you prove that wasn't the case then?
Well, I did an experiment, and what I did is I planted a bunch of saplings of a very common Amazonian tree species, a kind of cedar, and I planted them inside and outside devil's garden.
So this is a different tree species to what's normally in a devil's garden?
That's correct, a different kind of tree species.
And don't tell me they all died.
No, actually they didn't. When I planted them inside devil's gardens, I did two things. I planted them inside devil's gardens just as is, and then I also planted some inside devil's gardens with a kind of sticky goo wrapped around the base of the trunk to prevent insects from climbing up the trunk and getting at the leaves.
Right, and which ones survived?
And only the trees that didn't have this sticky substance around the trunk died after a couple of days in devil's gardens.
So some kind of insect was attacking them?
Exactly. So I showed that some kind of insect was attacking the trees in devil's gardens. Actually, all trees except for the species of trees that grows in devil's gardens.
And what was that insect then?
Well, it turns out that insect is a species of ant.
So these ants are selectively homing in on trees they don't want and killing them?
That's correct.
How are they doing that?
How it is that they attack trees in devil's gardens turns out to be something really, really fascinating. The ants, when they're attacking trees in devil's gardens that they don't want to grow there, what they do is they start by crawling up the trunk of the tree,
yep.
And then each worker ant bites a small hole in the leaf tissue or in the stem tissue with its mandibles, with its
jaws,
jaws. And then it flips its abdomen underneath its body. The abdomen of the ant is like its belly.
Yeah.
And it sticks the tip of its belly in the hole that it's made, and it releases a few drops of a very, very nasty chemical substance called formic acid.
And this just poisons the tree?
It poisons the tree.
But how do the ants know one tree species from another? Because they're not known for their intellect necessarily, are they, ants? So how do they know which trees to kill and which ones to leave alone?
Well, that's an excellent question. So the tree species that they leave alone, that they don't kill, that is the tree species that grows in the devil's gardens, it turns out that it has a very special relationship with the ants. The ants live in the hollow stems of this tree species. That's
right.
The tree species they use to make their nests.
Right.
And I thought for a while that maybe the ants choose whether or not to attack a tree in a devil's garden by first evaluating whether or not the tree could provide any nesting sites for them, whether it has these hollow stems for them to nest in. And I did another experiment, and it turned out that that's not true.
So what do you think's actually going? How do the ants actually, because we are a little bit tight for time, how do you think the ants actually home in on the right kind of trees to allow to survive and home in on those ones they want to kill?
My best guess is that they distinguish between the tree that they live in and all the other trees which they kill using some kind of chemical cue. They basically smell the difference between these kinds of trees.
So it's like recognising your favourite food by the smell of it.
Exactly.
Can I just ask really quickly, why are they called Devil's Gardens? It's a fascinating name.
They're called Devil's Gardens after an Amazonian legend, and this Amazonian legend tells it that these gardens are actually cultivated by an evil forest spirit. So that's how they get their name.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Megan.
Well, thank you for bringing us up to speed on that. It's a wonderful piece of work. Very interesting.
Cool.
Thank you, Megan.
All right, my pleasure.
Good to have you on the show.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Megan Fredrickson from Stanford University in California with a wonderful story about how these ants actually cultivate a forest and exclude every other kind of tree apart from just the one they want to nest in. And we're not talking a small area of forest either, we're talking something the size of a football field. You're listening to The Naked Scientist with me, Dr. Chris, and Dr. Kat, here with you until 7. If you'd like to ask us a science question, 08459 25 2000. We're talking this evening about the science of insects. And here on the show with us, one of our guests is Bee Wilson, who has a book out that's just recently called The Hive, and it's all about our relationship with one of our best friends, because I love honey. And in fact, she's going to be talking in Borders Bookstore tomorrow evening at 8 if you'd like to come along. It's completely free and will suit anybody and everyone. Can't promise you any honey, but you can have a cup of tea. We're calling it A Potted History of Bees and Honey. Bee, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what first interested you in bees, and what do you find most fascinating about them?
Well, I have to admit, I love honey as well, and I am a food writer, and there is, it sounds very silly, someone called Bee writing a book about bees, and I have to admit that's part of it. When I was a child, I always used to be given little presents with sort of Winnie the Pooh and honey on or something, and then at a certain point I suddenly realised not everyone being given these bee things is actually called bee, and therefore I realised there was a huge sentimentality out there about bees that I don't think we feel about any other insect. We certainly don't feel it about wasps or ants. And that got me very interested. Then when I grew up and became a historian, I discovered that we used to think, and still think, all kinds of weird, passionate things about bees, which again I don't think apply to other insects.
They are fascinating animals, the sort of the bumblebee idea. Because we've heard how insects can be really useful. But can you talk a bit about honey? I mean, does honey actually have any useful properties?
It does.
It tastes good, doesn't it?
Well, apart from tasting good.
It tastes delicious, and therefore it makes us feel good. It is a sugar, but it is probably a tiny bit better for you than refined sugar, because it has a slightly different composition of fructose and glucose in it than refined sugars. But it's basically still sugar, so if you're diabetic, you shouldn't eat too much of it. Over the years, all kinds of claims have been made on behalf of honey. People have said it could cure baldness if you smeared it on top of your head, or that it could make your...
It'll certainly make your head sticky, so the hair's not going to fall out, is it?
Well, exactly. People believed it would cure infertility, all kinds of things, and a lot of that's rubbish. But it turns out there are some things that it can do, and it's been used for years as a wound dressing. And there are scientists in New Zealand, particularly, who are working on that. And particularly with this honey called Manuka honey, which comes from a tree which is the same as what we call tea tree. And it genuinely has been proved to have higher antibacterial properties than other honeys. And it really does work.
Does it have the chemicals from the tree in the honey? Because you get different types of honey, don't you? Like heather honey and things. And they smell different.
And they smell different. They have different textures. Heather honey is amazing. I love heather honey, especially from Scotland. And yes, because it's called Thixotropic, which means it has the same consistency as non-drip paint. And yes, it's all to do with the different chemical makeup of different nectars.
Okay, we've got a question now from Marion.
Hello, Marion.
Hello.
How are you?
Yes, all right, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Naked Scientists on BBC Local Radio in the Eastern Counties. I hope you're having a very pleasant evening.
Yes, thank you.
And you want to know about bees?
Well, specifically about this substance that they produce called propolis, because I read an article a while back which was written by a beekeeper, and one of the properties in this article said that propolis is good for the immune system. Now, my husband has rheumatoid arthritis, which I don't know if the lady that to do with bees knows, but this rheumatoid arthritis specifically attacks the immune system. Now, I'm wondering if taking propolis would be any good in this respect.
Well, in fact, rheumatoid arthritis is the immune system attacking joint tissue when it shouldn't do.
Yes.
So it is, the immune system kind of going out of control a bit. Are you aware of this, Ian? Or
I do know that all kinds of claims have been made for it. I've had completely delicious cough mixtures made with propolis in it. I don't think it would do him any harm at all. Whether it would do him any good, I couldn't really say. I mean, there've been many claims made, but they haven't really been substantiated, I don't think, with scientific fact. But that's not to say it's not true.
Marion, do you want to have a quick go at the quiz?
Yes, I will. Yes.
Okay, here we go. The gas you breathe out is called carbon monoxide. Is that fact or fiction?
Fact.
No, bad luck. You breathe out carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide is the poisonous one produced by car engines and dodgy gas fittings.
Okay, Marion. You've got to get the next one right, okay? Okay, here we go. Jupiter has a beautiful system of rings around it. Science fact or science fiction?
No, bad luck tonight. No, it's Saturn that's the one with the rings, and you can see them with a telescope if you've got a good one.
I'll tell you what, it was a very nice question, Marion, so I'll give you another go, alright?
Yeah.
Here we go. Air is mostly nitrogen. Science fact or science fiction?
Fiction.
One more
Sorry,
chance,
Marion.
you blew it. Yeah, air is mostly nitrogen, 80% of it. Oxygen's 20%, and the rest is all, bits and bobs, argon, neon, carbon dioxide.
No
luck.
honey in the air, unfortunately, but you can call it a honeymoon.
Maybe jam tomorrow, Marion.
Thanks, Marion, for your call.
Thank you. Bye.
Dr. Chris and Dr. Kat, as the Naked Scientist, here with you until 7 on BBC Local Radio across the east of England. If you'd like to ask us a question, 08459 25 2000. We're talking to Bee Wilson, all about her book The Hive. We're talking to Ian Burgess from Insect Research and Development in Cambridge, who's an expert on all kinds of insects and how they spread diseases and that kind of thing, and William Foster from Zoology in Cambridge. William, most people are probably fascinated to see how organised ants and bee colonies are. How do they actually talk to each other and decide who does what?
Well, I think this shows that actually ants do have a big intellect. I mean, you said earlier on that these wasp things can be trained. So insects do have massive brains and they can do all sorts of things. They organise their colonies by a system of chemicals, which they release to each other, and that is a way of keeping in touch with what's happening to the colony. For example, if the queen starts to fail in most insect colonies, then the workers can pick this up and react accordingly because they don't smell her so much.
When you say fail, you mean what, she gets old and gets
Yeah, she gets old and weak
decrepit.
and isn't so sort of able to pump out babies for them all, and they pick that up and then could do something about it, like producing new individuals, new reproductives.
But how do ants, say, get told today you're going to go off and find food, and your job is to go out and find food and then come back and tell everyone where it is so they can go and find food? How's that achieved?
Well, I think it's a sort of a stable system. They're all, let's say they're all feeding, and then if suddenly more food comes, then more of them will go out and come back, and they'll all get agitated, and individually that will encourage them to go out and get more. So it's very simple rules that they're following all the time, nothing very complicated. So if they come back and they're full of food, then all the other ants will pick that up and go out and follow them.
How do they know where to go? Because you see them kind of marching in a line around the edge of the kitchen or something. Well, my kitchen. What are they following?
Well, it varies, but in many ants there is a trail which they leave, again a sort of chemical smell which they smear on the ground. Then all the ants kind of can follow that. You can see where they've been.
Can you get rid of it? Because can you rub it to get rid of it?
Yes. If you sort of brush it away, then maybe they won't go there. Sometimes the ants actually do it individually. They're looking at the sun or landmarks, and they don't need a chemical trail. So if you did that, if you brushed in that case, it wouldn't make any difference. So you could still see. So you'd have to have the right kind of species if you're doing your brushing.
Right.
Because I was reading the other day about bees, and they have a sort of a pecking order in the hive, don't they? And some bees are bees that are in charge of just doing housekeeping duties. They're kind of confined to barracks, and then as they mature, they're allowed out to go and collect things. How's that actually achieved? How do they decide when they've become old enough to get more responsible duties, if you like, in a beehive?
Well, the general idea is that as you get older, if you're a bee, you get to do different things. So you start doing things near the queen, which is where you're maybe born originally, and you help the queen. Certainly it's true if you're an ant. You'll help the queen, you'll sort of move eggs and things. And as you get older, you move further and further away from the centre of the hive. And then eventually, towards the end of your life, you do risky things. It would be a bad idea if, when you were a young bee or whatever, you went out foraging and defending straight away. You're liable to die. So it's only when you're quite old that you go out and fight. The opposite to what we do with humans, of course, we send young people out to fight.
But it's not just bees and ants that are social in this way, is it? Because some spiders do similar things, don't they?
Yes, there are a lot of social insects. Spiders, I mean, they're only just social. You don't get kind of worker spiders, as far as I know, which don't reproduce. I think the real test of sociality is there are a group of individuals which are sterile, which do not reproduce. Aphids are like that, rather surprisingly. So there are some aphids, greenfly, which are permanently sterile and just kind of fight and don't do anything else.
I know a few people in my college from medical school days who are a bit like that.
Who are permanently sterile.
Just went out and fought all the time. Let's talk to Bhargav, who's on the line. Hello, Bhargav.
Hello.
Good evening. Welcome to The Naked Scientist.
Yep.
We're going to have to be very quick because we're very short of time. What was your question?
What is the most powerful insect, like, which flies the longest?
What insect can fly the longest? That sounds like a sort of Ian Burgess type question.
Flies the longest? In a single stretch, probably I should think it's a dragonfly, and these animals spend most of their life on the wing, and they just come down to settle, to look, to see where the prey is. But they can fly for quite long periods. But there are many insects that have been found several hundred miles off of a coast. So lots of things can fly for long distances if they get caught by the wind. Actually, I think probably the one that flies furthest on its own steam is the little biting black flies that you get in West Africa, and they can do 300 kilometres in looking for prey.
And the most famous migrating insect is the monarch butterfly, which flies across North America to special roosting sites in Mexico and so on. That's a very famous, powerfully flying migrating butterfly.
I bet you didn't think it was going to be 300 miles, did you, Bhargav?
No.
Or even further. That's quite impressive for something so small as an insect, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm afraid we don't have time for you to have a go at the quiz.
All right.
All right, but it was a really great question. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you one quick question. If you get it right, okay, then we'll give you a copy of Bee's book, all right? We're going to have to answer it very quick. Owls are the most intelligent of the birds. Fact or fiction?
Fiction.
Way!
You're right, they're stupid.
They are actually, because most of their head, Bhargav, is actually taken up with their eyes. Owls, despite the fact everyone thinks they're really clever, they're actually really thick. Well done, you've won yourself a copy of Bee's book.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for joining us. See you later, great question.
The Naked Scientist Podcast, brought to you by thenakedscientist.com.
You are, of course, listening to the Naked Scientist Podcast, which is freely available from the nakedscientist.com website. We're very grateful to Anne Gray from sciencesleuth.co.uk, who donated this week's prize. More fun and frolics available from her website, sciencesleuth.co.uk. The other big prize on tonight's show was the 2006 Encyclopaedia Britannica DVD, which was kindly donated by Band and Brown Communications. Don't worry if you didn't win it this week, as there'll be one up for grabs on every single show until Christmas time. So if you want to have a go at winning it, just send me an email, chris@nakedscientist.com, with your questions. Now, another reason to drop me a line is to take part in a new feature for The Naked Scientist, because we want your science podcasts to include in our podcast and our science radio show. The guy who's going to be sorting it all out with Petro's podcast picks is Naked Scientist producer Petro Minch. Petro, what are you looking for?
Well, Chris, we're looking for, obviously, science-based podcasts, and we're offering podcast listeners the chance of their podcast being included in our podcast, which I think is a first. So we'd like podcasts maximum length of 1.5 minutes. If it's any longer, we will listen to it, but obviously, depending on how many we get, it might take a while.
And obviously, we want them to be preferably funny, and they have to be something scientific. So if you're going somewhere exciting that's scientifically relevant to the top of a volcano or perhaps to the bottom of the ocean, get recording and then send it to us. Chris@nakedscientist.com. Petro will have a listen to it, and the best ones will make it not only into the Naked Scientist podcast, but onto the Naked Scientist live science radio show each week. So get recording now and send them to Chris@nakedscientist.com.
Sorting out the sparks from the quarks. The Naked Scientists. For more information, get online at nakedscientist.com.
Next week, very spooky UFO special. We'll be going live to Rendlesham Forest with Anna Lacey to find out about what happened back in 1980. And also, we want your UFO stories. Thank you very much to the production team at The Naked Scientist. Thank you, Ian Burgess, William Foster and Bee Wilson. And we'll see you at the same time next week for a UFO special. Good night.